In this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast, me and my co-host Leif Thulin, we are going to talk about the Utah Jazz, because who knows the Jazz better than Leif Thulin? Not too many people. And he also watches more college basketball than anyone else. So I want to ask Leif, should the Utah Jazz go for the playoffs, or should they go and hunt for prospects? Stay tuned. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast their first listen of the day. I'm your host, Rafael Barlowe, along with my co-host, Leif Thulin. Like I said, the man that watches more college basketball than anyone else, and he has about 25 days until he's the happiest man in the world. But before we get into this episode, I want to let you know that it is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com to get started. And if you are not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please subscribe, like, share, leave a comment, click the bell so you can be notified every time we release an episode, because we are coming at you 5 days a week at the minimum. We've already recorded an episode today, and we kind of teased a little bit about Cody Williams, and we'll talk a little more about Cody later on in this episode. I definitely want to hear what Leif has to say, but I want to just get started on, your overall opinion on the direction the Jazz should go. I feel like they're in like this, I don't even know how to explain it, like this weird space in a sense. They're a young team. Lauri Markkanen is considered a vet. He just signed a massive extension. I think there's like 7 guys on the roster under the age of 23. But Utah is 3-0 in the preseason. They're a team that I think if they aimed at trying to make the play-in tournament, I think that they could be in that discussion. Maybe. They're very competitive, but I don't know if they're like bad enough to like be in the running for the top picks. I just want to hear your overall thoughts on the direction of the Utah Jazz for this season.
Well, yeah, I think you outlined it well, but I actually disagree about the capacity of how many games the Jazz could win, even if they were to go full out. So the reason I agree with the way you outlined it is the direction hasn't been clear the last few years. They've been in limbo. When Victor Wembanyama was the crown jewel of the class, not this past batch of rookies, but the year before, the Jazz opened that season 10-3 after trading Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. They proceeded to get the 9th pick that year, take Taylor Hendricks. Well, Hendricks, who knows what he'll end up being. We'll discuss that later on throughout this podcast. But then you think, okay, well, that's unfortunate because Victor Wembanyama was within sights if you had committed to something before, overachieved, and you didn't know what you had. Lauri Markkanen, you had the veteran presence of Mike Conley, Kel'el, and you overachieved. So then last year you think, okay, well, the Jazz don't have Mike Conley. They don't have these guys. And the Jazz find a way to win enough to be 500 based on playing 240 minutes. What I mean by that is 48 times 5. They found a way to fill their lineup so much so that they overcame a really bad start to the season and went 19-7 at one point to go on this long streak and end up 26-26 at the All-Star break. Then they proceeded to lose all but 5 of their next 30 games to finish out the season, which was the worst record in the NBA. So that's where the lack of clear mindset and determination of where to be ended with the Jazz, and they got number 10. I was pleased with the pick of Cody Williams, but this year I think there's no mistake to be made. The emphasis is on the youth movement of the Jazz. The Jazz will do whatever it takes to prioritize getting young players time. Keyonte George certainly at the forefront of that. You're going to see the rookies getting more time sooner than rookies have in previous years, such as Ochai Agbaji a few years ago, or Taylor Hendricks, who only came into his light later in the season last year. You're going to see the youth movement sooner. And I actually think the Jazz, even if they'd put their absolute pedal to the metal, try to win as many games as they could, I don't think they win that many because their schedule is unbelievably arduous at the beginning of the season. They play 32 games in the first 3 months of the season, full 3 months of the season against teams that are projected to win over 38 games, I believe. And then in their first November through December, not counting October, they play basically all playoff teams and then maybe the San Antonio Spurs, who are going to get significantly better, and then also play 16 of 18 games on the road in December. So I just think the Jazz will be out for the count too soon to make a rally. And at that point, it'll be behooving a benefit to the Jazz to not play well down the road and just further the experience of younger players once the record reflects that the Jazz are not competitors.
And see, I agree with that. But I also think Will Hardy is a really good coach. And I think they're going to be competitive again at the beginning of the season, even though the schedule is tough. I think they have a bunch of like playoff caliber team. Well, I mean, most of the West is a playoff caliber team. But I don't know. I just think that Markkanen's that good. And I've liked what I've seen from Kessler. I always butcher his name. I liked what I've seen
Kessler.
from him. Walker Kessler, even though he's been getting dunked on. Did he get dunked on twice?
Cam Whitmore dunked all over
Cam Whitmore
Jazz, but it was mostly over John Collins.
Okay. But so I like the way he's played. I think Keyonte is going to make a huge jump this year. And I like Keyonte, and even though, a lot of people may kind of disagree with it, but I like what Keyonte and Sexton can do in the backcourt. And then, of course, Jordan Clarkson. So I think they're going to be solid. But even if they went pedal to the metal, I don't think they'll make the play-in, but I think they could be in that discussion in that range, which, the better they are, obviously puts you in the further away from the opportunity to get the number one pick. So my question for you is, who's in their core?
That's a great question. So my belief is you have Lauri Markkanen is the only absolute in this. He's signed for the long term. He came back. He could have looked to be traded, prioritized living in Utah, which as someone who's from Utah is plenty lovely, but it's not necessarily the place for NBA players that have been very good to want to reside. It reminds him of Finland. He's all in. So he's in there from a basketball perspective, and in the long-term contract, I believe he wants to be in Utah. Then I think the next player that I think is the most likely to be on the Jazz in 5 years, other than Lauri Markkanen, is Keyonte George.
Yep.
I like Keyonte George. I anticipate he takes a big leap this year. Is he the franchise point guard of a championship team? Who knows? But the fact that you can even entertain that question, as Danny Ainge talked about in press conferences between this past season and this season, is something to be happy about, because he was picked 16th as a shooting guard. And now, yes, the focus was to make him a point guard, but he never played point guard before. To have that conversation is something that makes me excited. He looks confident. And luckily, the knee injury he sustained yesterday doesn't appear to be too threatening. He's supposed to be back for the regular season. And then you look at the rest of the team. I'm not the biggest believer in Colin Sexton on a winning team. So I would go to the next person on the core is one of Cody Williams or Taylor Hendricks. And I believe it'll be Cody Williams. Thus far, he has not shown very much. He's shown timidness, and that makes me a little scared. And I think Walker Kessler has been the biggest sigh of relief for Jazz fans in this preseason, because he had a great rookie season that no one really expected. Last year was a regression to the mean, sophomore slump, however you want to call it. He did not play with the same confidence. He didn't have the same playing time, sustained various injuries. He looks like he's stronger and more authoritative near the rim. He's still a good rim protector. And I want to see him have more impact than just the box score counting stats defensively. I want to see him deter a few more shots as opposed to blocking some. But he looks stronger, more physical, and more aggressive. So those are the guys I would point to. I have my concerns about the Taylor Hendricks and Cody Williams take. I'll talk about those when we dive into them. But I think those are the core three right now. And then you build through this upcoming draft and the next one where the Jazz have multiple picks.
Yeah, and as far as Keyonte, I was at the game last night, and I don't know if you could have saw on TV, he slipped into the Jazz bench, and I guess it was a drink spilled or something like that. And I saw him trying to wipe his feet, and it was he literally could not wipe his feet. It was, I don't know, obviously some water or something like that. They ended up stopping the game because he couldn't get on the court. I guess they dry it up. The next possession, he's collapses at half court. And Keontae's a Dallas kid. I can't say I know him well, but, I know him. So seeing him at half court, and he looked like he was in serious pain. And then I ended up seeing his mom after the game, and she said that he was fine. And she had mentioned that he could have came back and played, or he wanted to come back and play the rest of the game, but they were like, no, you sit down. So I'm glad he's fine, because it looks kind of scary from where I was sitting at. All right, when we return, I want to talk about the Jazz sophomore class, which is Taylor Hendricks, Keyonte George, and Brice Sensabaugh. I want to hear Leif's thoughts on their play this preseason. And then in the last segment, we're going to talk about the rookie class. Because if you think about it, at this time last year, if someone said the Utah Jazz would get Cody Williams, Isaiah Collier, and Kyle Filipowski in one draft, you would have thought they had 3 lottery picks. But before we get into the sophomores, let's talk about Game Time, which is my favorite app when it comes to purchasing tickets. Why is Game Time my favorite app? Because one, it's not just sporting events. It's comedies, theaters, plays, and more. But Game Time has all-in pricing. All you have to do is toggle the feature on the app, and it shows you the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. And also, you get a panoramic view from your seat, so you can see where you're going to be sitting. You see your view all in the app before you buy. Game Time also has the lowest price guarantee. If you find something cheaper, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference, and your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. All right, second segment. The Utah Jazz sophomore class. I think Keyonte George is the head of that class. Taylor Hendricks was thought to be the crown jewel of that class coming into his rookie year. But Keyonte, in my opinion, was head and shoulders above Taylor Hendricks. Even today, I think, like you mentioned, Keyonte is, I'd say, behind Markkanen, the next guy that I expect to be in the Jazz's future plans. But Hendricks, I have some concerns, man, some real concerns. Just looking at some numbers. And when I was going through the numbers with Taylor Hendricks, so far in this preseason, he's averaging 5.7 points, 4 rebounds, 1.7 assists, but he leads the Jazz in minutes played in the preseason. Now, he's shooting 44% from the floor, 43% from 3, but 0 attempts at the foul line. And it's just been uneven. Like, he was 1 of 5 from the floor against the Mavs, only had 5 points against the New Zealand Breakers. And we just saw Dylan Jones, a guy who has ties to Utah, like literally torched the Breakers for 26 points, 13 rebounds, and 6 assists as a rookie. And then, Taylor had a good game against the Rockets where he was 4 of 6 from the floor. He had 10 points. But so far, it's early. But for him to lead the preseason, the team in minutes in the preseason, he hasn't shown the signs of the sophomore jump that a lot of people were expecting. And he even mentioned that he is expecting to have a big sophomore year.
So I'll phrase it this way. I hosted Locked On Jazz for a while this summer, and one of my episodes that I thought was more alarming to Jazz fans was my one titled Who Needs to Prove It the Most? And I had 3 segments, and I talked about Colin Sexton, Walker Kessler, and Taylor Hendricks. But the one that everyone expected, Walker Kessler after a bad year. Hendricks has this infallibility among some Jazz fans, and some Jazz fans just don't like him at all. Like he's and not the person. I'm saying just the player.
Yeah. Taylor
Hendricks is working hard. He put on 21 pounds of muscle. That's the narrative around the Jazz. And so they think he's going to be the physical, the athlete that can push you over the top on a playoff team. If the Jazz can get there, that means that Hendricks takes those steps and he becomes the defensive ace a la Jaden McDaniels. That's who the Jazz want him watching film on. He's been very vocal about it. That's the guy he's trying to emulate. But the reason I say he needs to prove it is his shooting numbers came out to 39% last season. But if you broke it down month by month, they shot up so much in April, which was 7 games, because his sample size is that's when he got more minutes and he was left open as a dare shooter. So much so that teams would just be like, oh, do that little disrespectful wave, and eventually started making shots. He's a far better shooter than he was at the start of last season than the numbers displayed, but he's not a 39% true NBA shooter, in my opinion. And then that leads me to the defensive part of this. The reason that Taylor Hendricks was selected 9th was not what he proved at UCF, despite being a kind of revelation. No one knew who he was, and all of a sudden he's scoring 15 a game. He played against Jarris Walker and held his own. He played well against Florida State, who has a couple long athletic bodies to compete against, and voila, he's number 9 pick. The reason he was picked 9th is based on potential. It's the potential that he could shoot, the potential mostly that he could become a lockdown defender, because he showed these flashes of athleticism and coordination you don't typically see from an 18 or 19-year-old. Well, enter last season, Taylor Hendricks at the beginning of the season was not very good defensively, so much so that when he was in the game for the Jazz in his initial months into the season, the Jazz went zone. So if that means anything, that means that you're not getting the lockdown defender that you may expect. So my point about this is all to say he needs to improve from being theoretically a great 3-and-D guy to someone that is both effective on both offense, meaning he shoots the 3 well, and without hesitation. Like you're seeing he's not shooting the ball much in these games. And that's something I'll talk about with Cody Williams, but he's just not shooting the ball. And you need to be able to shoot the ball if you're playing as many minutes as he has in the pregame. Secondly, you need to be able to be the defender that people expected you to be at 9. It's not a fair expectation because he had a lot of things to fix. Whereas Keyonte George, his gripe was he was injured. He was playing at a weight that wasn't necessarily good for him, and he was inefficient. But he had all the basketball skill sets. There was no theoretical, oh, maybe Keyonte can become this. You knew what Keontae's skill set was. You just didn't know how good he could become and how fast. Hendricks was reaching on that. So I think Hendricks has a lot to prove, and I think he feels internal pressure to prove Jazz fans and Jazz executives right for picking him 9th.
Yeah, he just doesn't shoot enough. I think that he can be a 36, 37% shooter from 3. It's just, is he going to shoot threes? Like him and Cody, they lead the Jazz in minutes so far the preseason. They're combining to take 9 total shots per game. 9 total shots. Now, Taylor's shooting 43% from 3, but again, it's a small sample size, very small. And I was at the game last night, and he just didn't take a lot of shots. Like I just didn't see a whole lot of them. He was, I think he was 1 for. He was 1 for 5, but he had 6 rebounds. The Jazz killed the Mavs on the glass, but I'm starting to have some concerns. I mean, it's early. It's very early. But let's switch to Brice Sensabaugh, who he was off against Dallas. He was 2 of 11. But prior to that, in the games against the Breakers and the Houston Rockets, he scored 12 points, 11 points. He was efficient from the floor and rebounding. What do you think about Sensabaugh and his role this season?
I will be very curious to see how much he plays, because the Jazz want to play Cody Williams, and Cody Williams has not impressed, and he's been a deer in headlights. So I wonder if he gets minutes in the G League, pushing Brice Sensabaugh and Johnny Juzang, who's shot the lights out for the Jazz, up in the rotation. And that's where the competition is for Sensabaugh. As for Sensabaugh, my big takeaway, his body looks so much better than it did all of last season. He's thinned out even since the summer league, and that was where all the reporters in Utah were saying, wow, Sensabaugh looks like a new player, so much thinner, so much more athletic. My takeaways from the basketball I've seen, as opposed to just the physical changes, is Brice Sensabaugh is not meant to have the ball in his hands as a dribbler. He looks inept in that regard, but the dude can shoot, and I actually think he's a pretty good rebounder. So though he's not necessarily swift-footed, I think he can be okay on the defensive end because he brings something of value defensively in rebounding, and then he's a good spacer of the floor and is able to score from not only shooting threes, but can step into the mid-range that he dominated at Ohio State in.
And if they want to be creative, put him in like the mid post and allow him to exploit like his strength when he has a matchup against smaller guys. I think Sensabaugh could be like a wild card matchup problem that you throw out there when teams run with these like really small lineups. But other than, the game against Dallas, I thought that he had, he's played well. And I feel like in a fair, just a fair training camp, he's definitely put himself in position to be in the rotation. Now, will he be? I don't know. If you had to bet right now, is he going to be in their top 8 or 9 rotation to start the season?
I would say 8, no. 9 is going to be a battle. I think he's 9th or 10th man. I think the top 7's pretty well embedded right now, and it really just depends of how much Cody Williams struggles, because if he struggles and then he goes to the G League to elevate his confidence, that opens up a spot. But the starting 5 is going to be what the starting 5 has been. It's going to be Keyonte George, Colin Sexton, Taylor Hendricks, Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler. Then coming in will have been Cody Williams and John Collins simultaneously. Then a few seconds later, it seems to be Jordan Clarkson as the 8th man, even though he's obviously the scorer, go-to guy off the bench. So that's 8 players right there. And then you look at the backup big situation. Yes, I know Collins came in, but that brings in Eubanks into the equation. You talk about a couple other players. I think Sensabaugh is probably 9th. And then you talk about Isaiah Collier and maybe a Johnny Juzang, who has been the best player in the not summer league, but the preseason for the Jazz. He's torched the Nets, and I think he's made headway enough to be considered in that same rotation spot as Brice Sensabaugh.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. All right, when we return, I want to talk about this rookie class. Like I mentioned, at this time last year, Isaiah Collier, Cody Williams, and Kyle Filipowski were considered lottery picks on a lot of boards, and somehow they all ended up in Utah. But before we talk about this rookie class, let's talk about FanDuel, because you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, which is, as you know, America's #1 sportsbook. And what's new on FanDuel is that if you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats and you can view live play-by-play and so much more. And it's on the same page where you placed your bets. So you can check it out at fanduel.com. And you also can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. And all you have to do is place your first $5 bet. That's fanduel.com. All right, last segment. What are your thoughts on this Jazz rookie class? Actually, you know what? Before that, what were your thoughts on these guys at this time last year? Did you think they were all lottery picks?
No.
I wasn't high on Filipowski, but I definitely thought Collier and Cody Williams were top 10 picks.
I was quite high on Cody Williams. I would say I was pretty temperate on Collier. I had him probably 12 at this point, maybe 12 through 14, somewhere around there. And then I had Filipowski in my 30s. I wasn't very high, but honestly, Filipowski's, compared to where he's been drafted, the most impressive of the trio so far in the preseason. He hasn't necessarily, and I know what the pushback's going to be. He hasn't necessarily done a ton because he hasn't played as much, and Collier's facilitated. But when Filipowski's been in, he's knocked down the threes that he's taken, and he doesn't look inept athletically. That said, the largest contribution he's had was against the New Zealand Breakers. So Collier, he's frenetic, he pushes the pace, he's going to make errors, but he's going to make things happen. He had 7 assists in his last game, but he's really not shooting the ball well. And that brings me to Cody Williams, who I compared to you, I want to say in January of last year, to Jalen Rose. I thought Cody Williams reminded me of Jalen Rose, and that actually became a comp that I saw used occasionally across different sources. The reason he reminded me of him is he's got this length and ability to score in a multifaceted approach. He's able to score on push shots and like take advantage of his length and lack of physicality, compensate for his lack of physicality. He was a really good finisher. If you look at the numbers at Colorado, went and dunked in the preseason. Well, with the Jazz and playing actual rotational minutes against NBA guys, he's looked like a deer in headlights. And that's the more concerning thing than missing shots to me. It's that he's not taking them, and he's only value on the court at this point has been defensively. He's been all right defending quick guards, which allows you to believe that there's defensive versatility.
Well, actually, Filipowski's best game was against the Rockets. It was against the Rockets where he...
Yeah, at the end of that one, he was good.
Yeah, he played 10 minutes, but he scored 9 points, and he made 3 out of his 4 threes, and he had 5 rebounds. He had 13 minutes against the Breakers, and then last night against the Mavs, he only played 3 minutes. And Filipowski was a guy I personally wasn't as high on. I had like a lot of debates with people, especially like on our YouTube comments about Filipowski. And I agree with you. I feel like he's had the fewest minutes, but in the minutes that he has played, he looks like the most ready. Collier, the thing I like about Collier is he's trying to make something happen, which is not surprising. You know, if you've followed him for years, you know that's just who he is. He's going to be aggressive. He's going to get downhill. The shooting has been an issue. I actually turned the corner on his shooting at the end of last year when he came back from the, I think it was broken wrist or hand or whatever. He actually shot the ball okay. But now, like, the shooting concerns are really, really obvious and evident. He was 1 of 5 against the Mavs. He was 1 of 6 against Houston, and he was 1 of 3 versus the New Zealand Breakers. But he has had, 5 or 6 assists or more in 2 of those games. And me and James had just talked about it in the episode recorded earlier today. At least Collier knows, like, if I run the floor and I drive and I know where Lauri's at, I'm going to get some assists. And so it looks like
his passing has led to turnovers. No debate from me. But the passes have not been bad passes. They've just been inaccurate or poorly timed. Yeah. And I know that's picking a bone. Like, I'd rather that type of turnover than getting stuck in the air driving too deep. Like, he's been making proper passes. And as for the shot, like, I've sat behind him shooting during warmups, the shot behind all these guys as they shoot for warmups for years that have been on the Jazz. So now the youngsters I'm seeing for the first time and paying specific attention. And Collier's rotation on the ball doesn't go over the top. It spins a little bit out to the right. So I think there's something happening with his thumb for our YouTube audience. So I think the shot doctors, so to speak, will have to work heavily with him, along with Cody Williams, on speeding up his release. Because sometimes he'll catch the ball, they just won't shoot it. And it's not necessarily being a deer in headlight. It's not being prepared to shoot it or not catching it properly. So I do think there's room for growth in that. But I like the point you made about if he knows and he's cognizant that Lauri Markkanen's on the court and or Jordan Clarkson's on the court with him because they often have played together, then he doesn't have to force the issue enormously because he'll have other people carrying the scoring torch, which is foreign to him in his basketball career thus far.
Yeah. No, like I said, I like the fact that he is trying to make things happen. I can't really say the same about Cody, and I tweeted it last night. The signs were there. He wasn't always aggressive at Colorado. I remember having a conversation with an NBA scout, and he had mentioned that Cody had like the 2 good games in a row early in the season. I think that was before he had the mask on when he had one of the good games. I can't remember. And then he had mentioned that he spent the rest of the season trying to evaluate Cody. He was either hurt or he did absolutely nothing in the games. And so he was saying, like, I'm torn because I want to like him, but I don't know if it were the injuries or he's just really, really passive. And I think that there were like 6 games at the end of the year where he had less than double figure shot attempts in like the last 6 games. So with all that being said, at the game I was at last night, he was so passive. He didn't like make an aggressive move until, I want to say, late third quarter. He got fouled, got to the free throw line. I didn't realize he had 4 points. I thought he only had 2. Was the 2 free throws. He must have scored the other 2 like when the game got really sloppy at the end. But again, I was just not surprised, but he did a lot of nothing out there. Are you concerned about that?
Yes, because in the summer league, I recorded with James and we talked about our big board before the summer league versus after. And I had Cody Williams 5 on my board before. And then afterward, I had him at 5, and James also had him at 5 afterwards because without changing how the course of the team plays, without making it all about him as the top pick on the team, he was still able to make an enormous impact by attacking closeouts, shooting, honestly, sparingly, almost wish he'd shot more, and playing within himself and scoring efficiently. And none of that has come to light playing alongside established NBA players. Like, he's been available and open for shots. He's taken a few of them, but he hasn't made that many. And he had one highlight where he drove against the Breakers and dunked it on the right-hand side. And the rest of the ones have been free throws or run out layups. And it's been a ghost show in the half court. And you would like to see some of the ability to facilitate. We talked about how he's not necessarily amazing at any one thing, but he's good at a lot of things at Colorado, despite the passivity. What you look at is, he's long, he's athletic, he's good defensively, switches, he fits in, but you're seeing blending in without actually contributing. And that does concern me. And I actually shared a conversation with one of my friends who's very knowledgeable about the draft and the Jazz. And we talked about how we think he'll go to the G League because even though he's 7th in the rotation right now, you just need to build confidence. And that confidence is going to be more easily built through opportunity in the G League, even though we both thought he'd be immediately in the rotation. And we're pleased to see that he was.
Even then, I wonder in the G League, is he going to be really assertive and aggressive? I just think that's just part of his personality, because if you look at Colorado, he seemed more comfortable playing behind KJ Simpson and Tristan da Silva. And then with this Jazz team, he's obviously not going to be high on the pecking order, but he is going to have opportunities. But he seems to be trying to figure things out. He's more comfortable blending in than standing out. And to me, that's dangerous, because if you're on a bad team, and I don't think the Jazz are a bad team, but if you're on
they will be.
You think so? Well,
I think the Jazz are going 21-61 is my prediction.
They've never lost 60 games in the history of the Utah Jazz.
I do, actually, but I think they will.
You think this is the worst Jazz team in history?
Considering what the award is at the end of the tunnel, I do.
Interesting. It's like I said, they've never lost 60 games, and so I think they're going to be. I think they're going to be okay. I think they're going to be like they've been in the last few years. They get off to a strong start, and then they start making some type of change. I don't know. That's just my guesstimation. So with that being said, all right, if the Jazz are a 21-61 team and you don't have good numbers, that is, like, to me, the biggest red flag, because in my opinion, and I say this usually with like international players, you have to know how to hoop when you're on a bad team. There's a difference between playing basketball and hooping. Playing basketball means you play the right way. If you cut, you might get it back, and so on. And I do think the Utah Jazz play the right way. But if you're on a 21-61 team, there's going to be guys that are looking to get their numbers, because you can't be the guy that averages 5 points per game and shoots 38% from the floor on a 21-61 team. That's going to make it hard for you for your next opportunity. And so with that being said, I do want to see if Cody is aggressive if he is sent to the G League, but I can't name too many times since I've been evaluating him where I've seen him like just be consistently assertive and aggressive. There's some people that even think that when he was on the high school team with Koa Pete, who's like one of the top prospects in the country, that Koa was the dog on that team. So that's concerning to me.
I do really like Koa Pete, but to your greater point, I think it'll be imperative for the way that he plays, if he does go to the G League, to have him operating in the pick and roll. Yep. Even if there are mistakes, you need the ball in his hands. Because I think when he was at his best for Colorado, even after the injuries, but particularly before he had the ankle injury and the facial fracture, I think he was good at attacking switches. He would draw switches, and defenses would be like, oh, like he's long, he's athletic, and he wouldn't settle. Maybe he wouldn't get all the way to the rim because he's very slender, but he would attack the switch and go to the rim, and you would see passing flashes. It wasn't every time, but I want to see that established and honed in, and I want to see what he can do with the ball in his hands, as opposed to being relegated to being on the corner and occasionally slashing and largely being relied upon to be a catch and shoot guy. Because I said this is no hindsight whatsoever, even though I had him number 5, and who knows, I hope I'm right as a Jazz fan and just as an evaluator. But I said this, his 42% from 3 was the biggest misnomer of the draft. Like, he was a hesitant 3-point shooter at Colorado. So being a only catch and shoot guy when he plays with actual NBA rotation players in these games is not good for his confidence, because it puts him out of rhythm. And that's why I prefer seeing him go to the G League and having the ball in his hands and see what he can do with the ball in his hands. And then later on in the season, we'll get a taste of what he can do with the ball in his hands at the NBA level once he's developed his confidence and his game.
Will he have an opportunity to play with the ball in his hands with the way the roster is constructed is my concern. I agree with you. I think he's best with the ball in his hands, but also I would like him to be aggressive. If he's going to have the ball in his hands and he's going to be passive, then, it kind of defeats the purpose. But I agree that the 40, whatever percent it was from three was on a low volume of attempts. And he was tricking. Who would have thought that Ryan Dunn would be a more confident shooter and would make more threes in the preseason than Cody Williams has actual baskets?
For what it's worth, I liked Ryan Dunn.
I didn't think he could shoot, though.
I had him as a first rounder because if he had any semblance of a jump shot whatsoever, his defense would keep him on the court, and he landed in a perfect landing spot for him. But I agree with your assessment there that him over Cody Williams confidence-wise shooting the ball was not something I had on my bingo card.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast. Once again, thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Now check out the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast because you can win your league with advice from Josh Lloyd, the fantasy basketball expert. You can find Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, thank you for making this your first listen of the day. We are out of here.